Good evening. Welcome to U Talk. And honestly, the last thing we recorded was a downer. A 25% crash in the economy. I'm already
Technically, I
poor. I don't
predicted
need to be more poor.
24. See, upside, silver lining. Technically, I predicted 24, not 25.
Sure,
So
but
it's
in
a
any
1%
case,
better.
you have a promising career in politics ahead of you, Kyle. So instead, now we're going to talk about privatization quickly.
Yes.
Um, it
Big
has been
question. Should we reverse privatization? But first, what you were about to say, because I'm curious.
it has been evident that privatization has proven somewhat profitable to a small group of people within society. And a number of people will tell you that it has proven unprofitable towards a larger group of people in society. I'm done mincing words. Privatization has made corrupt bastards richer and has made normal people poorer. So,
Okay.
is
So,
it
I
worth
mean, should we?
undoing?
I mean, look,
That is the question. Is it worth undoing, or are we just stuck with our poor choices?
okay, well, let's talk. Okay, let's take a different angle on this whole thing, a different kind of way of getting to the end point. We need to ask ourselves, where does privatization work and where does it not work? Because private industry does work in certain areas. It does work really well. When it comes to, manufacturing like consumer goods, or just like t-shirts with bands names on and that sort of thing. You know,
Mm-hmm.
uh, art is a private commercial endeavor, um, in a lot of cases. And I'm using the term art quite liberally there. Um, quite
Liberally?
not that kind of liberally. Um, but yeah, so like take video games for example. A lot of people wouldn't consider them art form, but I think those people are wrong. And well, actually, correction, I know they're wrong. As a former game developer, I have the knowledge and skills to say that. And so anyway, so video games, very profitable industry, bigger than the film, book, and music industries combined. Like video games are, they are not like they used to be called the entertainment of the future. They're the entertainment of today and the future. They are
Excuse me. No, the entertainment of the future is my personal, privately designed, genetically engineered waifu cat girl. I will not hear you suggesting that I will be constrained by such things as a mere 2D or 3D displays in the future.
okay.
Okay, so look, before we get to
I
the
mean, you took it
philosophical
there,
argument
but
on video games,
anyway, yeah, yeah.
I'm gonna just drag us away from that for a moment because first I feel like we need to talk about why people thought privatization was a good idea in the first place.
Well,
I've
I figured we
actually
could
pulled
do
up some
that
of the
by talking
information.
about where it does work.
Yeah,
Yeah, and so
and
for certain industries it can work. Video games, there's plenty of competition there, thousands of games to choose from, and one that appeals to everyone. There's no matter who you are out there, there's a video game that will appeal to you. And so
unfortunately,
yeah, and so with that, it's we've seen that video game, there's a lot of competition leading to better products, and sort of there's some standard pricing, but even that standard pricing is quite flexible, and there'll be competition in pricing, but mainly competition in the product itself. Now, where it doesn't work is in things that are either essential, like they are absolutely needed, or where they're easily monopolized. Do you want to talk about that?
yeah,
Because I think
I'm
this is what
go-
you're about to get at.
I'm going to run over this. First of all, there's a few benefits of privatization that have been held to be more or less universally true. The first is improved efficiency, the idea that private companies will have an incentive to cut costs and be more efficient. So that means that if you have something where turning a profit is desirable, uh, privatization is allegedly good. It's also argued that a lack of political interference in the running of a business uh, should be a good thing. Corruption means that that argument is a non-starter, realistically. In a perfect world, maybe. But where there are the kickbacks, where there is the cash flow between enterprise and government, that's untrue.
So I
The
guess
other
what you're
idea is
saying is that has
increased.
the I guess what you're saying is that has the potential to be true if corporations and big executives weren't able to donate unlimited amounts, donate bribe
The white papers
unlimited amounts.
don't really extensively go into the concept of corruption. Um, the other idea is increased competition alongside deregulation. So, for instance, let's say that the government operates a let's say the government operates an internet service provider. And because there is no competition in the market, because they can't compete with the costs, that internet service provider doesn't invest in infrastructure. They just keep patching things together as it falls over. If this is privatized, theoretically, there is an incentive for someone to go, you know what? We could probably make some money by just running fiber optic cables everywhere. NBN Co. Sorry. The problems with this are that there are other externalities. A government run business can put social benefits above profits. The motivation of money may not be adequate in a way that the motivation of shared ownership is in working for a firm. You may have the ability for a natural monopoly where a government can set prices based not on what will provide profits, but on what the economy can sustain. And there are certain natural monopolies which should exist. For instance, we really don't need 6 companies trying to supply us tap water, especially with
There are
varying
six
quality
companies for
controls.
water.
No, there
Oh,
aren't.
okay,
This is an
okay,
example.
okay. For a sec,
Um,
yeah.
like, you don't want to walk into your next door neighbor's house and notice that they've got pleb tier tap water and then get lead poisoning. Nobody wants that. Waste of time, waste of space, waste of infrastructure. Just let everyone have the same damn water. So there are certain things where privatization may be useful, but those are regrettably in Australia not the things that have frequently been privatized.
Hmm.
We do not need the railways to be privatized. We do not need the electricity grid to be privatized. We do not need the
Especially because all of those things are easily monopolized. I mean,
yeah,
if
the
like you
telecom
can't have
telecom Australia
several,
was privatized in 96, I think, or 94
yeah,
was it?
around that time. I can't
Why
remember the
you do
exact date.
this?
Yeah,
Why you do this, government?
and see the biggest problem with that is essentially it like the private sector, they their incentive is just profit. So if they can maintain a cartel, and maintain a monopoly, and make all the profits available by not upgrading a system, even if upgrading that system would give a lot of benefit or give a better service, then they're not going to upgrade it because they're already making all the profits. They've already got the cartel or the monopoly. They've already
Mm-hmm.
got all the profit flowing into them. And with internet particularly, this was something that was trying to be done, was essentially have the infrastructure for the NBN's fiber optic network that would have been publicly owned, and there'd still be private internet suppliers, but they'd all use the publicly owned network. That way, no one would have a monopoly.
Mm-hmm.
And then the government would, or the government owns NBN Co, the government's business enterprise. who owns the infrastructure would then upgrade it as new technology became available, as was dictated by their, I think, charter and so on and so forth, and what their essentially their I'm forgetting the exact. Is it just called a charter for a government business
Yeah, the
enterprise? What they're
NBN
supposed to be
charter.
doing? Yeah,
But we've gotten a little bit too into technicalities here.
yeah.
And we
Well,
are like nearly at the 15-minute mark.
yeah, yeah. Well,
The question we have to actually ask is it worth undoing? Because like I've had a look at the there are two white papers in front of me. One is from the International Monetary Fund, and one is from the IZA's World of Labour site, which is an international think tank. And the one from the IZA is saying that it is important that governments not be afraid of allowing state-owned enterprises to be privatized. And they've used a lot of data out of China to support that. And the IMF one is saying that privatization may be right for you, see your doctor. They're saying that privatization is sometimes appropriate and sometimes inappropriate, and their data set is coming out of Great Britain.
we'll see. I'm glad you brought up Great Britain because they privatized their railway. They
Yes.
privatized it going back, and essentially they've recently had to, if I remember correctly, I can't remember whether they were just talking. No, I'm pretty sure they did actually suspend the entire railway market because God, you can't even call it a market. Essentially, they suspended the sort of privatized nature of it. And they need to essentially, some routes are just not profitable, and so they need to essentially buy it back if those routes, which are essential for the people who live around those areas, if they are to run, then the government essentially needs to run them or subsidize it.
What I find interesting with regards to the railways is that the privatization of the rails happened, I think, in 87 or thereabouts.
Yeah, about that.
It's been a hot bloody minute. And in 2000, there was a rail incident in October where 4 people were killed and more than 70 people were injured because no maintenance had been done on the railways. It was a derailment caused by metal fatigue on the rails.
Yeah, and see, that's actually a problem also in the US as well.
A board of inquiry found that no one entity was actually responsible for ensuring the safety of that rail corridor.
And see, that's actually very much a problem in the US as well. A lack of maintenance on both trains and the railway lines. And that's the profit motive coming into play. In order to maximize profits, private companies, when they have a monopoly, because there's no competition for profits against other people, therefore they're not trying to increase the quality of the service. Instead, they're just trying to minimize the costs because they have that monopoly or oligopoly, that cartel-like conditions. They have essentially all the profit. The only way to increase profit in that scenario is to lower costs, and that means cutting back on maintenance schedules. It means cutting back on essentially things that are essential for those railway lines to operate. And so we've seen something very similar happen here with the Northern Beaches Hospital in New South Wales. It not only did it cost twice as much as it was estimated to cost to build, but after that, it was put into the private hands of HealthScope, a Cayman Islands registered company, and they cut back staff as far as could be cut back, and even equipment, to the point where their own hospital staff gave the hospital a 0 score on quality of patient care. Not a single person gave it above a 0.
You've mentioned this a few times, which is just
and doctors. We're talking about doctors, having to go on 100-hour shifts, or 100-hour weeks, not shifts. So them working 100 hours a week, and And I mean, even just the food stuff was meant to be something like 14 or 15. They cut it back to like 4. So we've seen in all these, essential services, or easily monopolized industry sectors, we've seen the cutting back of costs, the wielding of monopolistic power to increase profits and withhold, such as in the case with two things actually that are coming to mind at the same time: the fossil fuel industry and renewable energy, which we'll get into why renewable energy is infinitely better at another episode. But also in the case of NBN Co and Telstra, essentially the wielding of, or rather the Telstra and the possibility of fiber optics, is that they refused to upgrade to fiber optics for years. We could have had, I mean, if we had a better government that had, pushed for a fiber optic network earlier, we could have had a fiber the home NBN in the 2000s.
Yes, but also unfortunately, then the then shadow minister for the digital economy, Stephen Conroy, would have been the then minister for the digital economy, and we would have had a faster internet and a one with considerably more oversight than is reasonably justifiable.
Okay, that's food for thought, but for another time. But to finish the point, essentially, what privatization does with essential services is it ensures lower quality services that are underfunded and designed to maximize profits, such as with the Northern Beaches Hospital, or that are overpriced, and also under-maintained, such as the railways in the UK, in Britain, where they pay much more than we do for a simple train trip. And so, should we reverse privatization? Well, with the benefits of renationalizing certain pieces of infrastructure, I would say yes. I mean, the downsides of not doing it is that sort of deficiency remains, and the upside is that we can get better quality of service, better infrastructure, much more well maintained, and it'll cost a bit in the short term, but it'll cost us much less in raw dollar terms than it would cost the economy over the long term to not renationalize or reverse privatization in those industry sectors and infrastructure. So yeah, we've just run out of time. Is there anything you'd like to say lastly?
I'd like to get the last word in on this one, because this is an exercise for the audience. Think of, how can we come up with the money to renationalize infrastructure that has been sold off, that is in the public interest to renationalize? And how do we find the political will to do so when recent elections have been judged by relatively narrow margins? I want you to all think, how can you convince your friends and your family? How can you convince your neighbors? How would you make the argument to a complete stranger that it is right and just to spend a large amount of money now in the public good to avoid wasting a much larger amount of money over a time period where it might reduce to almost being invisible? I want you to think about that. If it should be done, how would you convince people to do it? And please leave us with your thoughts, because we desperately need campaign material.